joining tonight. I think it's important to do a quick market update because the market did change since the last meetup. So that's the average for all property types, residential property types. Benchmark price still up almost 8% year over year, right? Average days on market didn't change a whole lot year over year. Months of inventory is up year over year, but also significantly up month over month. So if you guys remember last month, we were around 1 month of inventory, below 1 month in some property types. Now we're almost at 2 months, which is still low, but it's a quick change for just a month period, right? As we go into detached and semi-detached, it's pretty much the same story, right? You see a fairly substantial rise in months of inventory. And again, that's year over year. The month over month is actually more substantial than that as a change. But we're still higher prices than last year. Anecdotally, we do see when we work with our clients right now, it's definitely cooled down significantly. We don't see as many properties go in bidding wars. Obviously, if they're well priced, they still do, but it's not as much of a general rule. And there are properties that are sticking on the market right now. If you're trying to be too hopeful with your list price, it's not selling on day one anymore as it used to over the last few months. Is it the buyer's market? Not yet. Still strong seller's market, but it's a significant change just for a month period especially. The townhouse and apartment market is similar, but the change is a bit more significant, especially in the condo space. And part of that is the condo space was essentially on fire for the last year or so. It's pretty much one of the best condo market we've had in over 10 years for Calgary. So that's now over 2 months of inventory, right? Again, still seller's market, but big change. And I wanted to show this chart to kind of illustrate that because it's a big change month over month. But as you can see, that's the last 5 years, which yes, 2019 was the end of a downturn, but we're still really low, right? Like, it's like a third of the months of inventory that we had in 2019. So yes, a big change, and you can see the blue line, the red line is trending, right? The blue line is the actual numbers. So it's a big spike, right? Especially in a short time period, but relatively still low. Now, I personally think that over the next few months, as we head into the winter, we'll see further cooling in that direction. I don't think it's going to turn into a buyer's market, but I think it will continue to cool until next spring. That's my guess. And the trend is suggesting that right now. We're going to talk about a few things on how to get a good deal, which from the market update I just provided is getting easier, but still difficult. So a few things we want to cover. First thing, is that yours?
I forget.
First thing, know the market, right? So what we mean by that is before you're actually wanting to buy, start to browse, start to get educated, start to get an idea what properties are out there, what's a good deal, what's not, right? Like comparatively, because you want to make sure that when a good deal does come up, you can just pull the trigger right away, right? I'll actually hand it off to Layne here. He's going to cover a few of the financing aspects of that.
So one of the things is you know, to find a good deal is you have to act usually pretty quickly on it. And so it's obviously important to be able to have less of a financing condition or less of a timeline on your financing condition. So what we often run into is or even if you know the market, you've been following it, and you've got a friend who's going to co-sign for you, and he swears he's going to co-sign for you if you find a good deal. You go find a deal, and then you ask that friend to, start handing over their mortgage documents to your mortgage professional, and they start dragging their feet a little bit on it. Either they don't want to buy, they're having cold feet, or they're just slow at getting their paperwork together and don't understand the urgency the same way that you do. So one of the things I always say, it doesn't matter how rich your dad is, your dad, if he's self-employed, might not he might not pull out any personal money. So now he doesn't have any personal income to qualify. Even if he's worth $20 million in the stock market, it doesn't actually matter for residential underwriting, as silly as that sounds. It doesn't mean you can't go to corporate, but then your rates are different and everything gets a little confusing. So get everything ready, 100% ready. Get your down payment, your cash, get all your paperwork into your mortgage broker and have them review all of it. Now, the banks aren't going to review all that paperwork until you have a live deal, but you should be going through all of it with your mortgage professional, just because you need to make sure that all of it's been reviewed by somebody. The bank, you can't have money that comes out of crypto. You can use investment money and RSP money, but it's got to be handled properly, and you're going to have to pay some withholding tax on that. You have to make sure you know exactly what you're getting into before you.
Season, right?
What's that?
Like if you're pulling money out of crypto or something like that.
Yeah.
You need to let it season.
Yeah. What he means by season is you could use money that you have in crypto, but it has to sit there for at least 3 months, with one exception with one lender that's 1 month if you have enough down payment. So, but typically, no matter where it comes from, it's either going to come from your regular investments or your pay. But if you're pulling it from a source or getting it from a gift, then you need to have that money sit for long enough that it's actually usable. So you want to make sure you're ahead of all that, 100% prepared, so that you know what you're getting into. So when you find a deal, you can write an offer that day. You don't have to call around to see if you could write an offer. Wait 2 days, because as most of you have heard, if a good property shows up at 10 o'clock in the morning, there's offers. By 6 at night, there's 5, 6, 7 offers, half of them of people who haven't even seen the property yet. And that is changing. The market's shifting, but that's still one thing that's well within your control, is just to make sure you have all your paperwork done up front. And of course, you need to know what strategy you're looking for and the type of property, and know your market, and then know the type of property, and then know so that you can act with a little more certainty. A lot of people miss out on the first property they see, even if it's the best property, because they get nervous about, well, I've only seen one property. Even if that's the best property, people just fits all the parameters. Like, well, I just haven't seen enough. I don't have a good feel for the market. So just knowing, getting on the email list, reviewing properties as they come up, just has even if it's a few months ahead of what you think you're going to be able to buy, make sure you know your market, so that when a deal comes up, you can act on it quickly. Should you go unconditional? There's some circumstances where people can. If you either have the money in either cash or line of credit, so you know that you could just write without, even if your mortgage doesn't get approved or can't get approved on time, you still know you have the ability to use a line of credit on your existing property, or someone's willing to do that for you, a parent, for example, either cash or, again, a line of credit. Do you have a backup plan? So can you write unconditionally? If for whatever reason something falls through, do you have a backup plan? Can your parents actually help you out? And do they have the capacity to help you out, with cash or something else? I don't like doing unconditional for people. And this has been a tough couple of years for me, because I don't like letting people write an unconditional offer without at least 25% down, because 20% down is at least what you need, because it gives you some options for multiple lenders with different policies. If you put less than that, you're kind of bound by CMHC guidelines, Department of Finance guidelines that get extra strict, and it gets really challenging. If for whatever reason you don't qualify, it might even be the house that doesn't qualify, you're really limited with your options. And if you don't have a backup plan, you're likely going to lose your deposit. And it's possible you're going to get sued too. That's the other problem, is people assume that, so I just lose my deposit, right? It's like, well, no, you lose your deposit, but then if they relist it and sell it for less, they can sue you for the difference because you breached the contract. And sometimes you think, well, they're probably going to sell it for about the same. If it disrupts a purchase, if they go write an offer based on your firm's sale, because you wrote unconditionally, and something goes wrong and it costs them money, or they can't close, they can sue you for a lot more. So writing an unconditional offer is risky if you don't have some way to get that done. If you've got 25, 30% down, worst case scenario, we could go private. So you go to a private lender that's willing to say, yeah, whatever, I'll give you the rest. I don't care about the rest of your details. I'll give you a 75% loan to value, and it's going to charge you a lot for it, but then you could at least just relist it and sell it as a worst case scenario. So those are I guess, the parameters around writing unconditionally, and a lot of people have done it. But they typically had a backup plan of some kind, even if it was a really ugly backup plan. And to be honest, over the last 2 years, I haven't had to use a backup plan. It's usually come through, but it's still risky to do it without it. So this is where, trying to find a deal in a market like now, there's really slivers, timing wise, of where you can actually purchase and get a deal. And a lot of it is, during Stampede, everyone's like, I'm going to take a week off looking for houses, or over Christmas. And it's actually, Anthony and I bought my only flip because I hate flipping. If you've ever talked to me, you'll hear about how I really don't like flipping, and I think it's a terrible idea. And I've seen a lot of investors lose money over the years, and I'll spend hours trying to talk you out of flipping properties. And yet we did buy a flip and made a lot of money on it. And we bought it right over that Christmas, New Year timeline. There was something else that comes into play as well. But those are the times where, even in a busy market, people tend to be like, I'm just going to stop looking for 7 days or a week to do Stampede with my kids, or over the Christmas, New Year's holidays. Now, some people have more time to look, but also a lot of people are just like, let's just shut this off. We don't need to do this. Let's get through Christmas and then look after. So sometimes that's when a deal will show up, where you don't have 7 people that would typically be writing an offer, actually writing an offer. So you can, yeah, then some gone on vacation. And I think like this week is one of those weeks. Like right now is also one of those times where I think people, it's only been the last week or so, all of a sudden it's getting colder out at night. And people are like, oh, wait a second, halfway through August, like my kids are going to school in 2 weeks. This is just what I'm realizing. And it's people are a little like, we only got 2 weeks to kind of have the summer. I don't want to go looking at houses. So this is a kind of a lull as well. I do also think the market is softening or flattening out as well. But I do think that like a window right now is where you might be able to find a decent property too. So look during times where other people are less likely to look. Just don't shut it off completely. When people are worried about the market and there's volatility, when you're looking from a long-term perspective, it's less important. And if the market's going up and down, or people are hesitant about something, whether it be an election that's coming up or something, often it will freeze people right before that event is happening. And if everybody else is waiting sometimes, and this is what happened at the end of 2022, Toronto's market had corrected and started going back down. And the interest rates had just finished skyrocketing. So what happened is everyone was like, okay, well, Calgary's next. So, well, we had different dynamics. Our prices were the same for 15 straight years. Theirs tripled in the same 15-year period, while our incomes remained basically the same, like in terms of comparative incomes. So their market was due for a crash and ours wasn't. So the fundamentals were there, but there was a lot of hesitation towards the end of 2022. That's right when we had this opportunity for this property, and it was a listed property. It wasn't an off-market deal. It was listed on the market. Anthony tried to sell it to a few of his investors. Nobody bought it. He finally called me and harassed me into buying it with him because I couldn't say no. I happen to have identical properties about a block and a half away, duplexes that I knew we could turn into a rental, worst case, which is the only circumstance that I'd do a flip on. So we did it, and that was a really good flip for us. But a lot of it was the timing of the market. Everyone was a little bit worried, and we're thinking either long term or just because everyone else was hesitating, so we had the opportunity to buy it. And it was over the Christmas kind of holidays, leading right into Christmas. Yep. We actually did a deposit. I dropped off between Christmas and New Year's, the couple of open banking days. So,
because 2022 was actually a hot year overall, but there was that small dip, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about. Is even within a hot year, you do get those small dips you can capitalize on.
Yeah, we don't even remember that happened now. Like we don't even think but there was about a month and a half where everyone kind of froze and wasn't sure because Toronto had crashed. It was hitting the newspapers about Canadian, and it was all over the newspaper, Canadian real estate crashing. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's Canadian real estate on average. In Calgary, we were still booming. But it just created a very small window in there where everyone else was hesitant. And if you were willing to step back and say, well, what are my long-term goals? Does it really matter if I'm buying, if I bought this 3 months ago, would I be happy with the price? Or next year, will I be happy with the price? But Yeah, that's how I've only done my only flip. Happened to I wasn't trying to. That's just where it lined up. And again, not an off-market deal. It was actually a listed property, so you could still find deals on the market with the timing. The other one too is I would say make it boring. So get ready, get all your paperwork ready, and then don't say like, oh, I gotta go don't get pumped up after a weekend seminar. I gotta go buy a house in the next 2 weeks, because what if the right house doesn't come up? Don't buy a house when the right house comes up. So just make it boring, go look, stay consistent with it. Don't set time limits on when you wanna buy, just find the right house, set parameters around the type of house you want, and buy the right house. If a good deal shows up, great. But more importantly, as I'll now get into, how it really doesn't matter that much. But dollar cost averaging houses, it's different than dollar cost averaging a stock, where you take a certain amount and you buy it every 2 weeks, or every month you buy X amount of a certain stock. So you kind of dollar cost average. So you're not trying to time the market, because it's pretty difficult to do that. It's kind of the same thing with houses. Instead of trying to time the real estate market of when to get in, you might either wait too long or buy at the peaks, because you're trying to figure out what the market's doing, and it's very challenging. But with the combination of you're ready to buy, meaning you're prepared, you're qualified, and you have enough down payment saved up, and so a combination of being ready to buy, having enough down payment, and finding the right house, and then buy the right house. That's the important. That's kind of, so just continue to do that. When you save up enough down payment, start looking. When you find the right house, buy the right house. And I even make an argument of that it really doesn't matter that much. And I'll get into some details on that. The other one too is buy during the times of uncertainty. Elections are one. There was a study done in the U.S. about business investment. So they had already established medium-sized businesses doing an expansion, and they tended to see that during an election year, businesses wouldn't expand, they wouldn't borrow money. So they started doing surveys, and it was, okay, so if the Democrats win the election, will you do this expansion? Yes. If the Republicans win this, will you do the expansion? Yes. So why aren't you doing the expansion right now? Well, I want to see what happens in the election. It's like either outcome's okay, but just the uncertainty for some reason drives people to an action. So sometimes that's an opportunity by leading up to an election, or right now, because it's in the newspaper constantly. Every 6 weeks, the Bank of Canada announces something, and it's like the biggest deal ever, that they did exactly what everyone knew they were going to do. So they're going to continue to do that. Like there's a difference between a quarter point, maybe a half point, and for some reason it's slowing people down as you're leading. So there's that kind of uncertainty about what's going to happen. Stay consistently, kind of ignore the ups and downs, and just stay consistent in looking for the property that is going to be a good fit for your portfolio.
Yeah, and then a quick thing to cover as well regarding the timing of when you buy is excluding those small lows we were talking about, right? The small dips. I pulled up a chart here. This chart is the 10-year average month by month of real estate demand for Calgary up to 2024, right? And as you can see on a 10-year average, right? So that excludes just the last 3 years. We typically see the best market, or I'd say the highest demand, from March until the first week of Stampede, pretty much, right? July. Now, we don't really see that dip of Stampede week that we're talking about, because it's a month average, but we would see that if we're week by week. But what we do see is that's the start of the cooling down on a normal year, right? I was just having a conversation here before I started the presentation about that. It's actually normal for us to see that, but we haven't really seen it as consistently the last few years. So I bought a lot of my properties, my buy and hold, in November and December. And as you can see, that's a time where historically you do get better deals. People don't really want to move in the winter. They want to sell before Christmas, so they start to get quite motivated usually if they already have a listing that's on the market and not selling by Christmas. And no one's really looking around Christmas, New Year's we're discussing, right? So that chart shows that on a 10-year average. So what to look for? And that actually is a big way you can find good deals on market and off market, but especially for on market, is incorrectly listed properties. And that happens actually a lot more often than you'd think. Basement suite not on the listing is a big one. A lot of people will put filters, right, for basement suites. Like, oh, I want to buy a property that's got an legal suite. And you'll put the filter for that, or your realtor will put a filter for that. And it's definitely a great way to, not have to look at like hundreds of properties. But sometimes they're not listed correctly, and they will have a basement suite that is not actually added to the listing. That's especially common with illegal suites. Some realtors may not understand what constitutes an illegal suite, or the seller sometimes is concerned that they might get enforcement actions if they publicly list it as illegal. So sometimes we'll find some that are not on there. Extra bedrooms, that one is especially common if there's a bedroom that's kind of small, or it doesn't have a closet, or there's something that make it a bit of a gray area if it's actually considered to be a bedroom or not. But that's often a great opportunity to fix it up, right? Maybe it's a large space, you can add a closet, maybe you can reconfigure it a little bit. I've plain just seen some that are missing bedrooms in the listing. It doesn't happen as often, but does happen. Wrong square footage, again, is actually somewhat common. Sometimes there'll be inclusion or exclusions that shouldn't be there. And you can end up with, quite a bit of a different deal than what appears on paper. Wrong lot size, that one is more common than wrong square footage. Incorrect map location. So what happens when you list an MLS is you put the address. If you make a typo sometimes, it will send it in a completely different city, or like way out of where it's supposed to be. And on the map, it could be in Canmore and you're looking at the Calgary property. What happens there is if people have geofence, which is quite common for their searches, it won't show up, right? It's good to look for those. Bad pictures, right? As an investor, we don't really care too much about that, but as a home buyer, it matters a lot more. A lot of times, if there's not enough pictures, or the pictures make the property look bad, they won't even look at it. So obviously you have less competition there.
How do you know if this is the wrong information or not?
A lot of times by looking at the pictures, you'll find out, right? If, for example, it says it's 2-bedroom, you look at the pictures and you count 3, you can kind of start to see there's something wrong. With the lot size, you can verify either if there's an RPR attached, or on My Property, which is a website from the city of Calgary, you can check if the size matches what's on the listing. Sometimes it's obvious, like there'll be a digit missing. So it's, let's say, 600 square feet instead of 6,000, right? Sometimes it's obvious, but that still causes issues for anyone that's got to search, for example, for properties above 5,000, right? So it still reduces the amount of interest that's on that listing. Wrong zoning happens sometimes too. It matters a lot more for developers, but it can matter for you as well, right? I've seen all sorts of wrong zoning, like commercial zoning and residential properties and vice versa, like this weird stuff sometimes. So the next one is quite important. That's also how we got our flip. Like, it was a combination of different things. And we keep going back to that because it's a great example of a hot market and a listed property that we got a good deal on. And it had a few of these items combined, right? And the bad tenant was one. Now, I say bad in quotes. I don't necessarily mean that the tenant itself is bad, but maybe perceived as bad or difficult for a seller. A few examples of that are limited showing opportunities, right? Sometimes the tenant will be like, you can show my place, Sunday from like 10 to noon and that's it. Well, of course, it's hard to get people on the property when that happens, and that can help to get a better deal. Low rent. That's common right now and was especially common when rents started to go up. There's a lot of landlords that had long-term tenants and, had good tenants, decided to keep their rents lower. But that makes it more difficult to sell the property if they're in place for 2 reasons. The first one is the investor starts to doubt that their rent assumptions are correct, right? Let's say they think, it's going to rent for $2,000, but the current tenant's paying $1,000. Now they're like, is it actually going to rent for $2,000? So it turns away some people. And then, of course, they have to deal with the rent increase if they want to fix their numbers, which can cause to some issues, right? So even though we don't have legislative issues in doing that, it's still not a fun exercise to double someone's rent, right? Or long lease agreements. I've seen some of those, right? 3-4 years long lease, combined often with low rents. And again, that will turn away a lot of people. The thing is, you can often take care of these issues as an investor. That example, the flip, there was a tenant there that was paying less than half of market rent, was smoking weed inside, had I think he had a dirt bike and inside the house.
In the unit, yeah.
It was messy. It wasn't showing well.
It's a bit of a hoarder.
Limited showing opportunities as well. He had very limited availabilities for showings. Well, we negotiated a vacant possession. So that tenant really didn't matter, right? But it turned away a lot of people.
Well, and they originally listed half the take tenant. So
exactly.
We just wrote 2 offers. Okay, we'll write you this if we have to take your tenant. We'll give it to you for this.
Yeah, we essentially
And it made it so obvious that it was just their problem to take care of the tenant. So it worked itself out, but it's a weird issue. People were like, why is this guy's been here forever? And so an investor had bought it before us and then basically sold it within about a year. The tenant had been there for years, long before they bought it. So you're wondering, okay, well, what's going on? Why is this tenant refusing to leave that's paying half market rent? What's the back? It's just a scary story.
We were concerned about it, right? Which is why we asked for vacant possession. But like Layne mentioned, we wrote 2 offers, which is a strategy you can use, especially if the property's been on the market for a while and the seller's a bit stubborn. Sure, we'll take over the tenant, but if you get it vacant, we'll give you an extra $15,000. Really, we adjusted our numbers, right? We kind of gave them the vacant possession to what we actually wanted to pay, and then we knocked off $15,000 if we had to take over the tenant. And that was enough for us to justify as well taking care of that. But even if we had to take over the tenant, we could have given them money to leave, right? We could have waited until the end of their lease agreement. If you get a good enough deal, even if we get less than market rent for an extra year or 2, but we save, let's say, $15,000. If we lost $5,000 of rent, we're still winning, right? So that's a big one to look for. And the second thing that's used for that is most homeowner will walk away by default, or most home buyers, right? If you're trying to buy a house for your family and there's a tenant and they're there for 3 years and you don't really know how the tenancy rules work on top of it, you're gone. You're not even looking at that property, right?
There was also a very serious sewer backup issue, which was...
Yeah, that's another story. We'll cover that in a different presentation.
That was not serious at all.
Yeah. Well, actually, no, that is in the things to look for, though, is if there is an issue that appears to be a big deal, but to you it's not. For most people it would be a big deal, jump on it, right? The sewer backup was an example in this case. So there was a disclosed sewer backup because they had issues in the past. Well, I went to check out the property. I brought over a contractor with me, or home inspector. We use a former home inspector contractor. We had a quick look at it. It didn't seem like a huge concern. So we just added an inspection condition and made sure to do a sewer scope. And turned out they were just missing the cap on the clean out outside, and there was leaves getting in there. Because when we did the sewer scope, we found leaves in the sewer, which is not normal. So it was a quick fix, just put the cap on it, done. Never had issues after, right? Another one is engineering issues. Now, obviously you want to make sure that you're actually proficient in that area, but we have a client that is pretty proficient with fixing engineering issues. Most people walk away from these, right? Maybe your fix is your plumber, or maybe an electrician, and something that may be a big deal for someone else might not be a big deal to you, right?
Yeah, anytime somebody hears an engineering issue, somebody pulled a wall out that shouldn't be pulled out because it's a structural wall, there's an engineering issue. It's those are glorious, because a guy that I know that does flips for a living, 30 plus per year, he loves that kind of stuff because people think it's a $100,000 issue. And it's really, you just hire an engineer and a framer and get the city to come inspect it. Sometimes it's $2-3 to fix something that's no big deal at all. But the average person's I'm not even looking at that house once they read that. And that's where he gets some of his best deals, is serious engineering issues due to improper demo or something.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big one. Something everyone else is missing, that's where your kind of competitive edge or unfair advantage comes in, right? Is with your expertise of the market, right? Like for example, Layne and I do a lot of basement suites, right? Maybe you do a lot of flips or you deal with a lot of condos, whatever it is, right? A lot of people will oversee a good property because they don't see what there is to it. That flip we bought was an example of that. There was an opportunity to split the title, which in this case increased the value significantly. Most people didn't know about that, but we did, right? So again, look for stuff that you see, but most other people don't, because then you're not competing with everyone, right?
We were also a little more confident in it was being rented for $900 a month, but we knew for sure that it could be rented for over $16 a month at that time. Now it's over $2, but because I own about a block away, I own 4 identical duplexes like that. So for it was like Anthony first called me. He's like, "What are you getting for rent? Are you sure you're getting it?" It's like, "Yeah, you could believe me. It's not just a one-off. I've got 8 units, and this is what they rent for." So we were a lot more confident that most people would be that a $900 unit. And there was other units that are similar that rent for like $1,200, $1,250, not renovated. And I just think there was a kind of a lack of confidence in what it could potentially rent for. We were just a little more certain than most people because I happen to have property. So it just everything kind of combined for the kind of a Goldilocks flip for us.
And that applies for you as well, right? Let's say that the property you're looking at is in the same neighborhood or on the same street as another property you already own, and the rents right now are lower. And on top of it, for some reason, the listing realtor is claiming it only rent, like you can raise the rent to, let's say, $1,500 a month, but you know the market rent's $2,000, right? At least you get that gap, you get that knowledge that not necessarily everyone has about it. Next one, finding off-market deals. Now, before I even talk about this, I'll just preface that because it's off-market doesn't mean it's a better deal. That's a very common misconception. There's a lot of people that come to us and say, "I want to buy a deal off market. I'm not going to buy anything on market." I think that's a terrible mistake. Santosh not here tonight, but if he was, he'd say the same thing. We've pretty much never bought deal off market. I think about one link, but like
Number 3 is the only exception.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there are good deals, especially if you're a flipper. You just have to actually filter them through. So, a few ways you can find off market deals. Direct mail campaign. That's if you want to essentially do this as a job, because it takes a lot of time, right? It usually doesn't work that great to send like 30 letters and then wait for something to come back. It's a volume game. You need to send a lot of it and be consistent about it. But it does work. We know other investors, I have friends that bought really good deals that way, but it takes a lot of time. The alternative to that is the second one. You can network with realtors like us and others, and wholesalers that will essentially do this for you, right? That will have the connection for those off-market deals. And again, if you find a deal from a wholesaler that you're unsure about, not a lot of people do this, but Santosh and I are more than happy to help you review that deal, even if you're buying it from a wholesaler, just to make sure you're actually buying something that makes sense, that the price you're buying it at makes sense as well. But there's definitely deals there, right? You just have to be careful. Sometimes the comparables that are used are cherry-picked to make the deal look really good. And they might purposefully avoiding some comparables that would make it look a bit different. But it's not always the case. There's really good wholesalers out there, and again, good off-market deals. Third one is neighbor. Layne mentioned that's how he bought some off-market deals. We bought one together that way. I think that's actually a great one. When you buy a rental property, or even your house, like a property you own, introduce yourself to the neighbors and keep a good relationship with them, and try to make sure that when they decide to sell, they talk to you first before they go to talk to a realtor. It may seem silly, but actually works. But it takes time and consistency. It can take years, right? But at some point, most people will think of selling. And if you're the first person to talk to, and you can get a good deal with them, you can buy properties that way. There's a whole land assembly we have in Highland Park that was essentially purchased that way.
Yeah, we got one off the market, and the other 5 essentially were just
neighbors
picked up by stayed in communication with the neighbors.
And third one, I mean, most people I think in the room kind of know this, but there is off-market deals and good deals you can find on social media, investor forums, things like that, right? So obviously stay up to date with those. And again, we're more than happy to help you review these to make sure they make sense. Next one, foreclosures. Before I talk about what's involved, I'll actually talk about the second point. Are you actually getting a better deal? Sometimes, but just quickly looking at it and not reading the numbers, just looking at the price, I'm sure most of you wouldn't know which one's a foreclosure. So I picked up two properties. They're not identical, but they're similar enough that we can actually compare them. They're both around 1,000 square feet, both in Therrien Woods, and they sold about 3 weeks apart. It's a similar market. One's a bi-level, one is a bungalow. I have seen the top one. The top one was on market, was not a foreclosure. The second one was a foreclosure. That top property had nothing wrong with it. Wasn't a great property, but wasn't trashed either. Just an older original property. They both had mostly unfinished basement. The second one was the foreclosure. It came with no appliances whatsoever, and it came with all the risk of a foreclosure that we'll cover. The price difference, about 10 grand. Did you really get a better deal? In this case, it would have been better to buy the top one on market. The top one also was a corner lot and a larger lot. So really, you're not gaining anything. Now, there are good foreclosures, but in this current market, it's a lot harder than usual. A lot of them are selling at market value. So you really want to make sure, again, you're reviewing that. And what's involved, as is, not just as is as the moment you see it, but just as is the moment you get it, which means if it has appliances and you think they're included, they might not be there when you actually buy the property. There might not be anything really. If someone comes in and steal everything and trash the place, that's how you're getting it, right? You don't really have a guarantee that you're getting it the way that it was when you bought it. It's also only unconditional offers. The court will throw out every offer that has conditions right now. And it's unconditional, not just on the financing and the inspection condition, but also on any other warranties that are normally provided, like RPR or any issues with municipality, things like that. You're essentially on your own, right? So you're taking that extra risk. Some are sealed, some are open bids. It's a bit of a weird strategy because each foreclosure are kind of case-by-case basis, where they may start as an open bid and end up in a closed bid at court without a lot of pre-warning, right? You may think it's an open bid and it ends up in a sealed bid. The reason why I'm mentioning this is you might go into it, put your deposit down for the offer, think you have a pretty good deal, and then at last minute, it might turn out that someone's just overbidding you. And now you've got your deposit in there that maybe you would have preferred to use to buy something else. So again, it's a good strategy with a grain of salt, essentially. And if you have the means to actually buy unconditional, as we covered earlier. So effective negotiation. The first one, which is huge, and I think a huge understatement, think of the seller's side, right? Think of the seller's perspective, put yourself in their shoes. We see way too many investors that are like, I want this, I want that, because for me it makes sense. The seller doesn't care. That's the truth. Full stop. They don't care about you. They care about what's in it for them, right? So try to make sure you think of their perspective, what situation they're in, what they need for them to get a decent deal or get out of this situation. A lot of times it's not just money. Like sometimes it's condition period, sometimes it's possession date, right? Maybe they need some time to find another house, and if you can give them that, you'll get a better deal. Maybe it's the opposite, right? They need money as fast as you can. So really try to understand what their motivation is for the sale and what situation they're in. Next one's condition period, as we mentioned. Obviously, if you can go unconditional, it helps, but it's not always practical or safe to do so in your situation. But if you need condition, try to keep them tight and try to keep them reasonable. If your mortgage broker or your lender tells you that you can get your deal approved in a week, there might not be any need to try to get 3 or 4 weeks, especially if you're competing with other investors, right? Same thing with inspection. One thing that we find useful, especially in a hot market where we have multiple offers, is the inspection condition is often a bit easier to forego without taking significant risk if you can bring someone with you in the inspection, or if you're knowledgeable yourself to have a quick look at the property. Obviously, you can't do a full-blown inspection in a showing, right? You're not gonna start to like go on the roof and all that, but you can look at the big ticket items and get a rough idea if you can expect some bigger problems. And it also depends what kind of investment you're buying. If you're buying a flip and you're planning on gutting everything to the studs, may not matter that much that you get an inspection if you're redoing everything, right? At least you can look at some of the items you're not planning on redoing, like looking at the roof from the street or something like that, right? There are also some home inspectors that offer this as a service where you can actually bring them along in your showing if there's a property that you're quite serious about. They usually charge a reduced rate because they're not doing a full-blown inspection. And again, they can't do quite as detailed of an inspection as usual, but they can give you a pretty good idea. Again, that's up to your comfort level and what you're buying. Leverage inspection condition. What we mean by that is if you're buying a property that you expect is going to have potentially some other issues that are not visible in a showing, and you're a bit concerned about putting a higher purchase price because of that, use the inspection condition, put your price in, and once you get the inspection report, you can try to renegotiate those items with the seller that were unforeseen. I would never advise to do this intentfully, right? If there's a problem you know when you're putting your offer, I think it's disingenuous to actually go back to the seller and try to get a discount for that. But if there's something you suspect may be an issue and you can't confirm it for sure, you can often go back and renegotiate based on that, right? Like maybe there's some issues with the roof that you can see because it's in the attic or something like that. Deposit, a larger deposit can help get you a better deal, but not always. Most sellers care about the price, the conditions, the possession date a whole lot more than they care about the deposit. But in some circumstances, especially if they've been burned before, if they had deals fall through, a large deposit can help you appear prepared and serious, right? If you're giving a substantial deposit, it shows that you have that liquidity in your account, especially if you're giving it fairly quickly in your condition. And that can help a seller, that can help appease a seller's concern that you might not be able to pull the deal through. On foreclosures, it also matters. The court does like to see higher deposits, especially when two purchase prices are close to each other. So again, it can help, but you need to make sure that you actually have the liquidity to do that. And you also need to make sure that you're actually going to be able to close on the property, because if you don't, you could lose that deposit.
Most important thing about getting a good deal is that it's not important. And this does obviously matter a little bit depending on the type of property. If you're buying to flip houses, which again, I advocate against, even though we talked about what we did, is that like if you're flipping a property, the only thing that matters is the price you get it for. You have to get it for a good deal. If you overpay, you can't make up for that. It's really, you're running from behind. But when you're buying for the long term, the price, the deal you get doesn't matter at all, and it's actually more of a distraction. So when you look at building a long-term portfolio, the small amount, if you're owning a property for 15, 20, 25 years, which should be your goal almost as building a portfolio for long-term value of investing, then the right house is far, far, far more important than whether you get a little bit off in terms of the actual property value. I've overpaid for, my best property is actually overpaid for. I'll go over the details of that. But if a cash flow is better, it's a great location, it's easy to rent, it's easy to find good tenants, I'd be happy to overpay by 20 grand. I probably have in a couple of circumstances for a good rental property. Works out to about $100 a month, and that's while rates are relatively high right now. And some of that $100 is actually going towards principal pay down. But if it's got a good suite, great yard, lots of parking, easy to rent, just at a good location, just the fact that you're not going to have to drop rent to get it rented. You're not going to go vacant as often. You're going to keep you're able to pick better tenants because of all those features of it. It matters like does how much more you're going to easily make up that $100 a month, number one, and it's just going to be a better property for you long term.
And often better appreciation as well.
Yeah, often, and also depending on where you're able to get that because of the better cash flow. It also helps you qualify. If you're able to get better rent for it, it's going to help your qualifying and your ability to build a portfolio if you build a portfolio of better properties. So when you're building a portfolio, again, the focus is on buying a good property, and the getting a deal is actually more of a distraction to get in the way. And I've been stuck negotiating on home inspection items that were pretty serious, and really had to kick myself to say, like, no, I'm not going to give up this good property. And I do to, with my client, I have no problem pointing out to my clients, okay, this is a great property and a great deal. Like, if you don't buy it, I'm going to buy it. Is that okay? But like, try to talk them out of getting caught up in negotiating over, well, if they're going to be stubborn over $2,000, then I'm just not going to buy their house. It's like, well, that's really stupid on a $700,000 house. That's a great investment. But then I do it myself. So I understand how easy it is to get caught up in the deal and not wanting to overpay, because it's part of what we do in all our other parts of life. But when you look at it from the perspective of building a long-term portfolio, it's a distraction. A better house is far more important than getting a bit of a better deal on a house. One of the other reasons you might overpay for a property is also if you're buying a property as part of a land assembly. The last house we bought as part of our land assembly that Anthony was mentioning, we overpaid for that one. Obviously, it was the fifth of 6 properties that we needed, so it was well worth overpaying a bit for.
Yeah, the reason why is that in this case, it was a middle property, right? So we couldn't complete that land assembly, we couldn't buy that one. Well, we overpaid by about $50,000 on 6 properties. Didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a wash because it was spread out within other properties, and it allowed us to complete the project, right? So don't get stuck on getting a deal if it's preventing you from completing a project that has a large upside. That's going to actually cost you more than if you just overpay for it to get it done. We obviously want to get a good deal, but sometimes it's impossible. Right? In this case, it was impossible. So.
Yeah, it's because our long-term strategy was different. So even if we just look as a simple property, this is an example of a property I purchased, which is by far my deal purchase. I think we've got the wording wrong there, but my worst deal is actually my best property. I bought it June 2007. I'm not sure how many of you even lived in Calgary then, but that was the peak of the peak market of the early 2000s. That's when everything was at its peak. Benchmark prices in Calgary actually never hit 2000 that peak until 2022. So it was a 15-year period until benchmark prices in Calgary on average hit that. So benchmark, just to clarify that compared to average. So an average house means average transactions. So as rates went down over that same 15-year period and houses got bigger, prices got a little bit higher on average in terms of what was transacting, but that doesn't mean an individual house went up. It just people were buying more expensive houses because rates had gone from what was then normal at 4, 5, 6% down into the 2s and 3s. So people were able to, so average prices did go up, but if you actually bought a house and then sold it, that's a benchmark price. So same house bought and sold during that period. So it didn't, and not only, so this property I also overpaid for because I was in competing offers. That also happened to be when rates were at 10-year high because things were booming across the country at that time. This was prior to the subprime issue in the US as well. So everything was at a peak across the country, everywhere. So I bought when the rates were the highest, overpaid because I was at a competing offer, and I bought at the peak of peak markets. Like basically the worst investor ever was me buying that house in that timeline, which one speaks to why I don't like flipping. Like if I was trying to flip, I would have got crushed. But instead, I just made a whole bunch of cash flow off that property for 15 years. And now it's gone up in value and I've refinanced it and have all my money back out. And I wish I had 10 of those because that property is by far my best long-term kind of standalone property. It's got a great suite setup. south-facing backyard, it's also on a corner, so that backyard, so the windows into the basement make it super bright all day long. So it's south. No one's ever complained. Neighbors didn't complain. It's just been a really good property. It's in a location that isn't necessarily a good buying location. So overall, it's in a neighborhood that is not great for buying. Like, people don't like buying there, but in terms of rent, it's a few blocks away from nice neighborhoods, but the rents are the same. So I was able to, so even though I kind of overpaid for that particular property in that particular block, it was still well priced compared to the rents that I get. So everything about this property is good. It's good setup, yard, parking, 2 garages. You probably couldn't even get zoning to build 2 garages that big, because of just how you're only allowed, I think, 60% of the size. Of the lot coverage, and also your garage or garages could only be a certain percentage size of your actual footprint of your house. So couldn't even get done. So I love that property. Easily, I get another $200-300 a month rent out of that. So does it matter that I overpaid probably 15 grand at that timeline? And if you work into market timing, I maybe overpaid 40 or 50 grand. If I would have bought that same house a year or two later or a year or two before, it would have been way less, but it doesn't really matter because it's by far my best property. So it's a good property. So I still advocate that when you're buying long-term or building a portfolio of properties, that you have to get it out of your head that you're looking for a deal and just find the best property and be willing to even overpay for the best property. If it's a good cash flowing property, it's going to be easy to rent. It fits all of the criteria that you've set out for how you're building your portfolio. Just be focused, laser focused only on finding the best property. Obviously, you don't want to completely overpay, but it is just don't let yourself get distracted by a deal. One of the challenges I have is people that flip properties and hold properties, because when you're flipping, you have to focus on all that stuff. But then if you're shifting over to getting in the mindset of, okay, now I want to pick up another rental, it's hard to actually shift your mindset. But you have to really just be conscious of the fact that there is a different mindset you need when buying a property for flipping than buying a property for long term. Because you might get a deal on a property that's just not going to be quite as good. And if you own that for 25 years, not quite as good, might add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of the impact that it has on your long-term portfolio. So I think that's pretty much it. You guys have any questions for Anthony or I?
I was wondering, so compared to 2007, you said you saw the peak here in 2022, right? Like the same levels?
Well, it finally the benchmark prices finally caught up in 2022.
And for condos, by the way, that was around 2023. Took a little bit longer.
Do you remember what happened in the years post 2007, buyer sentiment and just overall investing?
I think a lot of it was just overbuilding was a lot of it, especially in the condo market, because everything was moving everywhere. And there was at one point where I think we were number 3 in North America for cranes building towers. So office towers and condo towers. Calgary's never really been a condo city, but condos, when the oil really started taking off in the oil sands, every developer in North America came to Calgary and built a building. The problem with condos is by the time they realize, oh shoot, there's really no condo market in Calgary, and the market's turned a bit, they still have to finish the condo.
The time from start to finish is a lot longer than building a single family house. So often the intention to build is in a completely different market than the actual final product that hits the market, right? So it's difficult for them to time it. So they tend to correct in very different ways, where a single family home, usually from start to finish, maybe 2 years, including the land acquisition, right? So it's a lot easier for these builders to correct their supply as the market changes.
And then, so there was a few soft years kind of left over from that. Then in I'd say 12, 13, 14. It was kind of a boring market, which I like boring market, just slowly buy when you find a good property. That's what I preach, so to speak. And so, I was slowly buying. And then 2012 to 14 was a really booming market again, oil and gas driven in this particular case. But then it corrected very quickly when all of a sudden pipelines got shut down and then oil crashed. And all of those things combined just crushed our market again. And then it took us through until COVID as that market. So the fundamentals were always supportive on the bottom end and of rentals and everything else. But there was just leftover inventory. It was like shadow inventory and reluctant landlords of people who got stuck with a house that they were renting out because they actually couldn't sell it because there wasn't enough equity in it. They didn't want to be landlords. They just had to be, and they just but all of that inventory started getting slowly eaten up in 2020, 2021. And it just, every time prices went up, it's like, okay, well, now there's equity built in. There's no more of those reluctant landlords. And then we really noticed beginning of 2022 is like, okay, that shadow inventory that we have known has been out there for a long time is gone now. And now we're out of property.
That's why in the beginning of the price increase we saw in Calgary, there was a lot of those reluctant landlords that were selling. And you kind of noticed it on the rental market as well, because a lot of people that were applying to rentals were like, my landlord's selling, right? Because they were those landlords, like Layne was saying, that didn't really want to have a rental property, but they didn't want to lose money. So they rented until the price made sense again to sell, right? They were kind of the first wave of sellers that we saw, so.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's funny, like just back in 2015, I bought my first rental property, right?
Yeah.
And that was like the peak of the market,
Yeah.
right? And that's still my best performing asset, right?
Yeah.
Cash flow and equity.
And technically you overpaid for it based on market even if not, specifically for the property. But yeah, that's kind of, the property is definitely more important to focus on when you're building a portfolio again.
So, lastly, just want to pick your brain. So, you say flipping and buy and hold, right? Obviously, it's a huge difference. But for somebody who's looking to kind of switch over from flipping to more buy and holds, do you have a summarized strategy that works best?
No, it's about as simple as it sounds. Stop buying good flip properties and start buying good buy and holds. That's it. And sometimes they can be good. Often what I've done over the years is talk people out of flipping by saying, okay, if you're going to flip, at least buy a house that worst case scenario, you could keep as a rental and it'll cash flow for you at the very
Which is
least.
actually how we did our flip. We actually didn't intend to flip it when we bought that duplex. Yeah, our plan was to renovate it and hold it, right? Do a BRRRR. And then it's always good to review numbers, right? And that's what we did. We did the renovation, we reviewed the numbers, and we're like, okay, this is too good as a flip, so we'll just sell it. But we didn't have to, right? If the flip option didn't work, we would have kept it and happily just keep renting it out. So
be making $2,000 a month off that if we'd have just kept it. It would have been a good.
Yeah, you had a question?
So I'm curious in terms of financing strategy. When we're talking about deals, you obviously never know when the deal's going to come up, and with financing, you don't want to necessarily get it pre-approved if you're not immediately going to be buying something because there's a certain term and you're taking the credit hit. So do you typically just get a rough understanding of what your financial capabilities are, and then as long as you're kind of within a certain range with the safety factor, then if you see a deal, you'd be comfortable, let's say, with a deposit and then work on financing later?
I'd say get fully pre-approved as if you're going to go buy a house next week, get all the paperwork in and everything. And then if it takes a couple of months, then you're probably going to need an updated pay stub, but big deal. But largely, if nothing changes credit-wise, if you're not borrowing new money, if you're not changing jobs, if everything's staying the same, then your qualifications should pretty much hold. So you don't have to keep pulling your credit once a month, but you definitely want to get prepared up front. You want to get fully pre-approved along with your paperwork. And sometimes even when we're rushing a deal in, we'll send in an employment letter from 5 months ago to say he still has the same job. Here's the pay stub. We've requested an employment letter. It's on the way. And the lender, even though their policy might be we don't work on it until we have the employment letter, they'll kind of ignore that and say, well, you have one, I get it. So at least you're, like we'll call based on this one, but we still need the updated one.
The problem if you don't do that is it takes too long to get your paperwork reviewed and to get that approval. And if it's a good deal, you lost it already, right? So you want to make sure you essentially save as much time as you can in the process. Right? Because if tomorrow, like let's say you've never reached out, or maybe you just got your income checked, right?
Yeah.
And you reach out to Layne tomorrow and you're like, hey, I need to close on this in like 4 days. He's gonna be like, probably no way. Right?
Yeah,
it might be too quick of a timeline to actually do all that work. And that's not just based on you, right? It's the lender too. Like they need some time to review. So
we could usually do it pretty quick because once we have all the paperwork, we could get it in. Like at worst case scenario, it's the end of the day. Like even if we get 10 deals in one day, which doesn't happen, but let's say we have 10 live deals coming in one day, we'll work until we get them all submitted. It's the lender that's like, we have 3-day turnaround time, and their underwriters go home at 4:30. They don't care what they're doing. Like they don't, like they're banks, right? They're going home at 5 o'clock. They're not finishing their project. They're going home when it's going home time. So there's some lenders that send us notice and say, hey, we're 5 days on turnaround. Well, if you have a week for possession, that's 5 business days. So being the first time, if you submit a deal with all the right paperwork, the first time an underwriter will see that deal, even pick it up, is basically at your condition period. So like that's how tight the numbers can get, or the timelines. And then of course in busy times, it's even worse than that. So not the case right now, but in the spring, we often get that where certain lenders are a week behind, even on live deals. So there are challenges. So you just want to be as prepared as possible. And like we're conscious of the fact of how much it impacts your credit. First of all, pulling your credit 2 or 3 times a year is expected, so it's not going to hurt you that much. But we're definitely not going to pull it enough to impact your credit. Like we're aware of how that works. And I would also say that if you're consistently looking, it's not going to take you a year to find a good house. You might not be able to do it in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And the last year, as the market was so crazy tight, the last couple of years, I guess, it might take you 2 or 3 months. But I mean, if you had someone looking that
if you
didn't stop
consistently
looking,
looked, you would have found something, right? Because again, the goal, especially for long-term property, is not necessarily to get a crazy deal, but to get the right property. And those right properties did come somewhat consistently, right?
And what would have been overpaying in competing offers in July of 2022, you'd beg for that price right now, right? So like waiting for a deal sometimes makes like if you're in a busy market, just you could overpay if you're buying for the long term, because like it's like look back 25 years ago in 1999, if you bought a great property for $110,000, it has been an awesome property for you, easy to rent, always cash flows better, always have good tenants. Like if you bought it for $130,000 or $128,000, would it matter today? Like none of that would matter. It's a $680,000 property today that cash flows like crazy. Would it matter that you got it for $128,000 or $130,000? No, it's that you have that good property. That's what's actually mattered for the last 25 years. So apply that same going forward, and that's what's important. So if you have to overpay for a good property because you're in a busy time, like a crazy market, which thankfully I think we're leaving that. But even if you have to overpay because you're competing offers, just accept that, we're just going to have to overpay a little bit. And that's what a lot of people have had to do, because there's only so many good rental properties and a lot of investors looking. People have overpaid, but what would have been considered an overpayment 2 years ago is now a steal of a deal. So not that I advocate for overpaying, but within reason, focus on just finding a good property. And I think if you're consistently looking, there's no way a good property didn't come up over a 4 or 5 month period. So
Sean, you had a question.
Where do you see the market going in the next 12 months?
Yeah, the crystal ball question. Right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like doing prediction, but I think the next few months are a little bit safer to predict, maybe. I think it will continue to cool down a little bit going into the winter. Next spring, I think, is a bit harder to predict, because with rate reduction announcements, there are a fair amount of people that are on the sideline right now waiting for lower interest rates. So we could see something different. But I think for the rest of the current 24 year, we'll continue to see a bit of a cool down. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy, but I think that's the trend we're going to see, which seasonally is the normal trend, right?
I would argue. I'd say the same thing. Is it's seasonally it's going to work, and I think the demand has softened a little bit. I think rentals have flattened out, despite what the stats say they're always a year behind because they compare to a year prior. I just re-rented everything, a few for a little bit more, a few for a little bit less, but overall I actually think it's been more challenging to rent. I always rent at the end of summer, so I'm usually advertising July and August. I think the rental market has softened. Just had way more work to get my properties rented, managed to get the same price, but I think I also got kind of lucky.
Which was my experience too. Similar rents, but a bit of a softer rental market.
Yeah, there was no 30 people wanting to see it. It was a couple, and luckily they turned out to be good, and I re-rented a handful of properties, but I think I got luckier that I did. It's the market. The market's soft, so I think rents are tough. And then...
Well, we should clarify, it's softer.
Right.
It's not a soft rental market, but it's not as crazy as last year.
Yeah.
But similar prices overall.
Yeah, any property that I'm
seen.
renting that I've had rented for more than 1 year is still a big bump in my rents, because I tend to, even if I raise rents on existing tenants, I tend to not raise it as much. I don't go right to market. So as those people left, I still was renting for more, but I also just find it more challenging than last year. And so I also think that our building stats have been really strong. So I think that we're going to have more inventory hitting the market at a faster pace. We also just have a massive population growth. So I don't know how it's going to form together. Like, is that population growth going to support all the inventory that hits? It's certainly
there's a lot of factors at play, which is why I'm cautious of predicting next year in terms of market. Because like you said, we have strong population growth, although it's slowed down a little bit, but we have a lot of supply hitting the market. And the question is really going to be that balance of that supply and that population growth going to next year. And if we're actually going to oversupply the demand that we have, or if we're not, right? So I think we'll have to see.
And then rates
as
will
mortgages
go down.
renew, we may also see a resurgence of people moving from out of province. If they're renewing from their 2% rate to maybe now it'd be like 4.5 or 5 by next year. Some people may decide to move to Calgary for affordability reason, but there's a lot of different factors. So.
Yeah, it's really tough to see how this. I don't think there's no model out there that could predict it, because this set of circumstances never happened before.
We'll take one more. Yeah. Sorry, you asked earlier. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the different ways that you structured your partnerships or your JVs when doing deals together?
Maybe we want to
Poorly?
cover that one on a different topic. We can chat about it after, because there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of different options and whatnot, but we can have a chat after.
I was wondering, let's say you're investing or you have a specific property that you're interested in, right? Whether it's for a flip or for a long term. I was wondering, what's your methodology for finding comparables for that property when you go into negotiations with sellers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, if you're looking at an off-market property, it's a lot more difficult if you're not working with a realtor. There are some online services where you can get comparables. It's not always 100% accurate. You often don't get the private remarks, so you may not get the full picture. But if it's on market and you're working with a realtor, or like I said, we can help you review off-market properties, any good realtor will have access to those comparables, right? So we can help you with that.
I'd say the most important part of that is reviewing it with the question for anyone that didn't hear was how do you assess off-market? Find comparables for off-market properties, and you need to talk to a realtor. I mean, or if you know an appraiser, somebody who has access to the sold data and that isn't going to cherry pick the stuff that benefits their deal.
We'll make an exception. One more, and then we'll wrap it up.
I got a question for you. What does constitute positive cash flow from a rental? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that depends, right? I'll ask one person in the room, they'll give me a different answer than another, right? So it depends a little bit on your personal situation. It depends on the market that you're buying in. And it depends, like by market, I mean like the city you're buying in. Because if you're buying in a city, for example, that historically has no appreciation whatsoever, you're going to be wanting to have a higher cash flow, right? Because to get a decent return on investment overall, you need more cash flow. If you're in a market that has historically a higher appreciation, you may be willing to forego some cash flow because appreciation is a bigger part of your return. So it depends a little bit. But the one thing I would say is make sure when you do calculate that cash flow, you actually include all the costs, because too many people will look at, like mortgage payments, property taxes. They might look at like condo fees, insurance, and then they'll look at their rent, and they call that cash flow, right? But make sure you look at your rental vacancy, and that you include some allowance for repair and maintenance and all that to look at those numbers, right? Generally, anything positive right now, by I'd say $200-300 is already a decent cash flowing property because of the higher rates, right? Because the rates are forecasted to drop, you don't necessarily need as crazy high of a cash flow if you're going to hold for like 5-10 years. If we had that discussion in 2018, 2017, we would be advising a higher number because pretty much everyone was forecasting rents to go up at some point. We didn't know when, but the rates were low enough that you need a bit more of that cushion, right? So yeah, it depends.
You basically need something positive, nothing.
Usually, but not always. That's actually a different presentation we did. There's different investment strategy, right? For example, that property we said we overpaid by $50K as part of land assembly, we were also losing a ton of money on the cash flow. We were negative like $600-700 a month. We were happily negative $600-700 a month because we had a plan to actually redevelop that property in the short term. So it didn't actually matter within the short term period. So depending what you're buying for, it may not matter. But if you're buying for like a 20-year hold, and especially if you're a newer investor and you're just starting to build your portfolio, usually you want to be positive because that's a defensive measure, right? That positive cash flow will prevent you from having to sell when you don't want to, which is in down market, and it will help you keep qualifying for other properties, right? Because the lender, every time you buy, they will apply an offset on your rent, and if you're crazy negative, it's going to make it harder and harder to qualify.
And yeah, that is one of the problems with buying with those strategies, is that eventually it starts impacting your capacity to qualify for more properties. The other one that I'm dealing with a lot right now is that starting to get finally better in the last couple of months, but is that a lot of people are taking variable with the idea that even if they want fixed and like fixed, that they take the variable with the intention to lock that in, lock into a fixed rate in 8 to 12 months when rates are likely going to be significantly lower. So a lot of people have that strategy. So if you take what it could rent for today at a fixed rate, might cash flow a couple $100 a month. If rates go down another percentage point before they lock in, then they might be making $700 a month. But in order to do that, we have to take the variable. So they have to overpay for a while in terms of the rate. So there's someone taking a rental variable rate 7%. Now that's come down, but that was where people were getting variable rates not too long ago. You use that number and it's like, oh, that's a break even, or I'm losing $100 a month. It's like, well, yes, but let's compare it to what you could lock it in for today, and what you and then whether you decide to take the chance on the variable strategy to get the better strategy is a whole different conversation. But it's hard to make a comparison of if you've got a property that has a 3.8 mortgage and it cash flows this much, and then you're trying to compare your new purchase, but you're taking the variable strategy with the idea that that's going to end up better for you by waiting to lock in the rate, but you're comparing it to 7%, well, nothing's going to cash flow. So that was a challenge. It's getting easier now because the variable is now starting to come down. So people are being, number one, more confident that the variable is going to come down, but also the numbers themselves are actually working.
By the way, that's why we typically benchmark properties apples to apples, right? We'll apply the same rate, same amortization, same loan to value to all properties. And then obviously you may have a different amortization, different rate or everything. So you want to look at it as apples to apples, and then look at it from the real life situation that you're going to have to make the decision. So we'll wrap it up. Thanks everyone for coming.